She's also the executive director at KFF's Public Opinion and Survey Research Program, and it's in this latter role that she oversees the KFF's polling work, which includes their ongoing survey partnerships with news media and organizations. In 2015, Dr. Brodie served as president of the American Association for Public Opinion Research, and in 2018, she received the Roper Center's Award for Excellence in Public Opinion Research. Her research has been published in major medical and health policy journals, and she co-edited the book American Public Opinion and Healthcare. She earned her master's and PhD in health policy from Harvard University, and tonight she's going to be discussing the art of polling in an election year, using the 2016 election as a case study. Molly, welcome.
Thanks, Vicki. This is hilarious. Like the whole Dr. Brodie thing and the whole like formal introduction. You guys just have to know that not only is Vicki one of my favorite people in the world, but I've known her. She's been one of my best friends since we were children. I've met many of you because I've been to Houston for many a bar mitzvah and many of other events. So it's nice to recognize some of the faces. And then, of course, many of Vicki's families here, who is basically my family. So I'm just gushy and gushing right now. But I'm going to have to put on my professional hat and talk to you about what I'm here to talk to you about tonight. And then hopefully we can have a little bit of discussion after that. I'm going to share my screen because it's hard to do polling without talking about, without showing data. So I'm going to show you some slides. Hopefully you're seeing all that. Vicki, thumbs up, you see it? Great. So my goal tonight is really just to make sure that we're all the best consumers we possibly can be of the polls that we're seeing right now, reported endlessly through the media as this election season continues. I wish that I could give you a whole methods class on polling and convince you that it's scientific, but just to start, I'm going to start with a definition. So what is polling and survey research? What do I spend my career doing? It's a scientific method, so there is a science behind this that allows you to represent an entire group, their views, their experiences, their behaviors, by talking to a smaller sample of that group, right? So it's not different than a blood test. We don't have to take out all your blood to find out, you know, how your red cells and white cells are doing. Similarly, when you're cooking a pot of soup, you don't have to, and you're serving guests, when we used to be able to have guests because we didn't used to be in COVID. But when you had guests and you were serving a pot of soup, you didn't have to drink the whole pot of soup to be able to tell if your soup was hot enough to serve, right? You would take a sample of it, but you don't just like take the sample right at the top or right at the bottom, right? You have to stir it up. You have to do good methods. You have to do it the right way. And if you do it the right way and you ask the right questions and you design a project in the right scientific way, then you can talk to a smaller group of people and represent the views and experiences of a big group of people. Now, there are a lot of different purposes for a poll, right? There's horse race polling, which is what we're going to largely talk about tonight. And that's basically a single question. If the election was being held today, which candidate A or candidate B, would you vote for? Quite frankly, horse race polling is silly because if you just waited to the end of the election and you waited till all the votes were counted, you would know the answer. You don't really need horse race polling, but that's what we're going to talk about, and we'll talk about why and whatever. But there's other kinds of polling that I personally think are incredibly valuable to society. There's election polling, which is a broader concept of polling, which is most of the surveys that you see reported on right now, they do the horse race poll, but they also ask, what's the most important issue for you in deciding your vote? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the direction of the country? How are you feeling about your representatives? Have they been representing your view? So election polling gives you a sense as we're have our representatives been serving us well? How are we feeling as an electorate? And that is a lot of very valuable information that helps shed light on really what's happening in the context of an election season. Policy polling, public policy polling, that's what I do for a living. That's what I do all the time. That is all the data you see about what the unemployment rate is in the country. That's based on a poll. Are you employed or unemployed or looking for work? Anything that's about the quality of your schools, health insurance. I mostly do health policy polling, problems paying medical bills, problems paying rent, chronic condition. Anytime we're trying to figure out what's happening to people in their real lives, or what they think or what they want to happen in a public policy domain, we do public policy polling. There's another type of polling, market research. Many of you might be in businesses or companies. They do all sorts of research to find out, to make decisions and planning. So you want a red car or a blue car? Do you want this or that, right? So there's different kinds of polling, and there's different kinds of methods for all this polling. We're going to talk about horse race polling. So even in a normal year, and certainly 2020 is anything but normal, but in a normal year, horse race polling faces different methodological challenges than some of that other polling I just talked about, right? Probably the biggest issue is that when you do horse race polling, you're trying to represent the views of people, but you don't really know who that group is, right? When I'm representing the views of the American public on how is their healthcare going for them, I know who I'm representing. I'm representing all of the American public, or I'm doing a project and I'm representing the uninsured. I know who they are. I know how to reach a random sample of that group. But for a horse race poll, I'm trying to represent the people who are actually going to show up and vote that day. And that's, who knows, right? Many people plan to vote. They might not make it. Some people aren't even registered to vote. They might get registered at the last minute. So there's just a fundamental challenge with horse race polling of not knowing what your population is. So there's a whole science around likely voter models and all sorts of things, because you're trying to predict who's actually going to show up that day so you can represent those people correctly. Other ongoing challenges are, polls are a snapshot at a point in time. Elections are fluid. Lots of things happen. There are debates. There are news reports, lots of things happen. So your poll always is only reflective of that moment in time, but yet horse race polling is supposed to be telling you who's going to win an election. So that gets complicated. And probably one of the hardest things, especially lately, is that polling tells you the best representation of where the popular vote is going to be. Most of us have now lived through at least 2 elections in the last 5 presidential elections where the popular vote was not the same as who actually won the Electoral College. And so when you see a poll or horse race poll, that is not the same as the Electoral College. And doing that mapping and that math in between is not simple. Okay, so horse race polling is always challenging, but something happened in 2016. And that generated a narrative that said polls are broken. And it generated a narrative that put the entire polling industry in the defensive position. So we should take a second and unpack that. So Vicki had mentioned that what used to be president of this group, the American Association of Public Opinion Research. It is the national professional organization for anybody who does surveys. So it's the Census Bureau folks are there, there's marketing people there, there's all the nonprofit policy people like me there's media pollsters. So there's 2,500 professionals around the nation who are part of this organization. This organization took all of our smartest election statisticians and we put them on a committee, and they reached out to everybody who had done surveys in horse race polling around the 2016 election and asked all of those people for the raw data. They got all their data sets in, and they did a ton of analysis, and they wrote a huge report. And basically what they found is that the committee succeeded in identifying several factors that led to the polling errors in 2016. And fortunately, most of those factors are fixable. Yay, us. They found a lot of other stuff, but we're going to talk about what those factors were. So this is probably the most important chart from that entire report. And the report is available free of charge on the APOR website in case any of you are as much of a data nerd as I am and want to go actually read it. But this is the key chart. And what the yellow line is the distance. It's how big an error the average polling result was right before the election to the election outcome, right? So basically it says early on in 1936, 1940, 40, we used to have a lot of errors in our polls, right? It's like 12 percentage points off from what actually happened, right? But you can see that over time, the industry brought that error down, had some problems in 1980, it popped back up. But in the most recent elections, the actual polling error, the distance between how far off the polls were from the actual result is pretty small, right? In 2016, for example, the national polls were 2.2 percentage points off from the answer. So overall, the polls were actually, the national polls were actually incredibly accurate, despite what you've heard. It's basically the polls concluded that Secretary Clinton had won the national vote by about 3 percentage points. That's actually what happened. But that's certainly not what you all took away, right? You all thought the polls failed. So why did you think the polls failed? Well, you thought the polls failed because it was a very unique year in other ways. So let's take 2012 first as our first example. In the normal case, the direction of the error of the polls, so for example, let me take a step back. So in 2012, the polls said that Barack Obama was going to win re-election. That's who was leading the polls. And in fact, Barack Obama won a second term as president, right? But in fact, the polling error was actually greater in 2012 than it was in 2016. It was 2.9 percentage points. And not only that, it went in the wrong direction. So what the polls were actually saying leading into the actual election was that Mitt Romney was on average going to get about 3 percentage points more of the vote than he actually got. But because they were predicting the right outcome, that was the right outcome, nobody said that 2012 was a mess, right? You didn't think there was any problems with polls in 2012, although they were actually less accurate than they were in 2016. What was so different about 2016 is that the direction of the error was towards Secretary Clinton. So it said she was going to win by about 3 percentage points more than she did. She was leading in the polls, but then the Electoral College had Donald Trump winning the election. So that's why it felt like it was a big polling mess. There were some things that did go wrong. So let's talk about those. And what did go wrong was many of the state-based polls. So you can see here that particularly in some of the key states that were sort of the deciders, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, the average state polling error was much bigger than what I just said the national was at 2.2. So for Wisconsin, the average error was 5.1, Michigan 6.5, so the average error, overall in the states was 5.1, but for Wisconsin it was 6.5, and Michigan 3.5, Pennsylvania 4 to 5 percentage points. Why were the states so wrong? Well, polling's getting really expensive for lots of reasons we could talk about forever, but we're not going to, but it's really expensive to do polls. Many of the state level quality polls have gone out of business. A lot of the state media, like the leading media organization in the state used to sponsor polls, they don't anymore. So there was many fewer state-based polls. And what was filling the gap was a lot more lower quality polls. And then there was one more big methodological problem that the APOR report pointed to. And that's these lower quality polls almost always made a major mistake by having too many college grads in their poll. And college grads were much more likely to vote for Secretary Clinton. So they were overrepresenting that group. Basically, the technical term is that they weren't weighting by education. We could talk about that, but weighting is it's important and common to do a good job of representing your population. They weren't doing that. That was why so many of them were wrong. As a visual, don't worry about all the details here, but purple's good, green's bad. On the right there's a lot more green polls in battleground states than there should have been, and they were mostly wrong. Something else went wrong, and that's late deciders. What I said earlier is that polls are only a snapshot in time. It turned out that in 2016, there was a disproportionate number of people who were really only deciding in their last week of voting, particularly in some of the battleground states. So, and those voters tended to break for Donald Trump. So there was something else that the polls were missing that also went wrong. And then the third thing that really went wrong is, as a nation, we were paying way too much attention to election forecasts, which are different than polling outcomes. So election forecasts are models that people basically take a bunch of inputs and they model and they predict an outcome, right? So the inputs were those state level polls, many of which were wrong. These predictive models are very new in this election context. They have an unproven track record. You've probably seen them. Nate Silver has a very famous one, 538. They were on average wrong by at least 8 percentage points. You know, us as humans, unless we're really, really used to playing craps and going to Vegas all the time, we're pretty bad at understanding odds and uncertainty. So, for example, these predictive models were saying Secretary Clinton had a likelihood of winning between 71% and 99%, right? That seems pretty likely. That's very different than if we just stayed focused on what the poll results were telling us, which is that on average, Secretary Clinton was about 3 percentage points ahead of Trump. That suggests a close race. Both of those numbers were true. It's just the way the election forecasters were displaying and talking. It changed the narrative. It changed the narrative that we all were hearing. So those were all the things that went wrong. Let me just mention a couple things that weren't a problem. There wasn't a shy Trump voter. There had been sort of this narrative that Trump voters were embarrassed or they didn't want to tell pollsters how they were really going to vote because the narrative of the nation was that Secretary Clinton was going to win, so they didn't want to be honest with pollsters. There's been an enormous amount of research on that. There's no evidence that that's true. Something else that was a rumor that was wrong with the polls is that Republicans were refusing to take surveys and we didn't have enough Republicans in our polls. There's also a ton of research on that. That's also not true. So those weren't the problems. So really what the three big problems were is the state polls were of lower quality. They weren't waiting for education. The polls had a bad time with late deciders this particular year, this particular electoral cycle. And the forecast models set our narrative wrong and our expectations wrong because we're not good at understanding likelihoods. So what are pollsters doing now? So what's happening in 2020 to try to protect from those problems? Many of the likely voter models, again, this is because we don't actually know who's going to show up that day, they're getting adjusted to take more into account late deciders in news environments. Weighting by education has become ubiquitous in the state level polls, and there's a nonprofit, many of you may have seen or heard of the Pew Research Center. They did they gave a gift to the industry by taking a bunch of data, analyzing it, doing all the number crunching on it so that there's a file that's just publicly available that anybody who's doing state-based polling can grab that file and do quality education-based weighting. It's one of those things that's a little bit hard and a little bit time consuming, and so the state polls weren't doing that last time, and now Pew's made it super easy, so you have no excuse. You really can and should do it. Most of the national polls that you'll see now, they're doing a lot more discussion about uncertainty and error in presenting their results. So for example, if you go to the New York Times site and you look at Nate Cohen, who writes about polls all the time, horse race polls, I should be clear, he has all of his charts have kind of low turnout models and higher turnout models. So they're giving more information to us consumers so that as we're evaluating it, we can evaluate, well, if I think it's going to be a high turnout election, this is what the polls are suggesting. If it's a low turnout, the other, probably the biggest deal that's changed is lots of folks, lots of people who have the resources are devoting their resources to doing high quality state-based polls. The New York Times is, the Washington Post is, Fox News is, CNN is. Lots of the nonprofit groups who do polls are doing battleground polls. We've even done some. It's a long story, but I'll tell you why if you want to ask. But so there's many, many, many more high quality polls. So there's better data at the state level. That's great, right? So you should just say, woof, we're fine. Don't worry about the polls. Everything's great. But 2020 is 2020. And my understanding is that 2020 is now becoming a verb. You've been 2020'd. So 2020 has its own set of challenges. We anticipate and expect that early voting and vote by mail will be very different than it's ever looked in the past. How do election and horse race pollsters deal with that in their models? They're used to their experience telling them about what share of the population will vote on election day versus before election. Things are all up in the air. There is COVID-19. What is the hesitancy for people to go out and vote if they're not comfortable with a mail ballot, or they're not in a state that doesn't allow mail ballots? We don't know how COVID-19 will impact voting turnout, particularly among older voters who are most susceptible to the virus. We know that there's a very significant effort to keep voter lists very clean. And the question is, a certain amount of voter list cleaning is absolutely appropriate. It's methodologically required. It creates rigor. Too much voter cleaning could create a perception of voter suppression. We don't know what's happening. We also have a president who's not so fond of vote by mail or about election polls right now because they're not going in his favor. He's somebody who has lots of good things to say about polls when they look good for him and not a lot to say about them when they're not. And so we just don't know how that's going to affect things. So 2020 is different. So what's my advice to you? So what do you do? So like, what's a person to do in all of this? What are we supposed to do if we're trying to be good consumers? So the things not to do, please don't give any individual poll too much weight, especially if you see some big outlier. If there's some poll right now that says nationally President Trump is 15 points ahead, or there's a poll that says Vice President Biden is 15 points ahead, those are what I would consider outliers. Don't pay any attention to them. Personally, I'm really only looking at state-based polls because I don't care what the national polls say, because I know the national polls don't relate to the Electoral College. So I only care about what's happening in certain battleground states and what those polls say. Really be careful about which polls you're looking at, and you have to look at their methodology. So I'm using the term non-probability, but think about opt-in polls where you don't know. There's there's a panel of people, you don't know how you chose them. The scientific methods are not the same as representative polls. Those polls are particularly challenged at a time when you're trying to do small geographic areas. So I personally would look for anything that says probability-based, anything that says randomly chosen, but random probability-based. I would look at the real mainstream polls right now. If you see some pollster that you've never heard of before, maybe don't give that poll as much weight as somebody you have heard from before. I also don't suggest looking a lot at the horse race question. I mean, that's one thing, but look at the broader picture that's in the polls. How are people feeling? Are they feeling optimistic or pessimistic? What is the top issue for them? If their top issue is coronavirus, who do they think is doing better on coronavirus? President Trump or Vice President Biden? Like, that's where you can get your real sense of how people's sentiment is really shaking out. The other thing to definitely do is train your brain not to see an exact number. See an approximation. Assume that there is some error around any number. And just one final thought. So I can't do a Winston Churchill accent. I won't even try. It'll be embarrassing. But he has this famous quote that many of you probably have heard. Many forms of government have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those forms that have been tried from time to time, right? So we have co-opted that quote we have mangled it. And I think it's the same thing for polls, right? No one pretends polls are perfect. No one pretends they're all wise, or that, and many people will say they are the worst form of learning what people think and experience, except for every other possible methodology you could come up with. And as somebody who is a policy pollster, it is incredibly frustrating to me that the performance of polls in our industry more generally is defined by whether horse race polls do a good job or a bad job telling you an election outcome that if you were just patient enough to wait till they counted the vote, you would know the truth, right? I do this work. Like, why am I a pollster? Well, I do it because I believe in giving voice to people in debates. I believe in making sure that people who don't always have a seat around a political table, around a policy table, that their real life experiences and what they think and what they believe are heard and are focused on. I want to make sure that policymakers, that journalists, that politicians keep a focus on the people that they're serving. And the only way I know how to do that, the only way I know how to give them representative data of what people are experiencing, what they think, is through high quality, representative public opinion survey polls. And that's the only way I know how to do it. I don't know any other way. And that's why I do this work. And that's the power of it. And so when somebody comes up with a better way, great. I'm all for giving up on this one, but there isn't one yet that I know. So with that, I am going to stop sharing, and I am here for a little bit longer.
Wow. All right, Molly, thank you so much for that. I had a couple kind of softball questions prepared for you, and they basically comprised your last 3 slides. So really, I mean, that's what I was going to ask, is what should we take away from this? How can we be good consumers? And I was going to ask you about that Winston Churchill quote and find out why you consider polling like that quote, like polling is a quintessential, the crucial way of being a representative democracy. So yeah. But I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you reorganizing your schedule in order to be here. I will let you go because we're like exactly on time for your schedule.
Amazing for you and I, because we always go over, because that's just how we talk. But anyway, and Dave, you guys know I'm her friend. I talk as fast as she does, so whatever. Like, sorry.
Can you accept questions?
What's that?
Accept questions?
I think we're not going to do questions right now, but I can make Molly. I can like collect questions afterwards and send them on to Molly and have her respond.
I'd be happy to do that. All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Mol.
Bye.
Bye. So I thought that was very fascinating, and what I kind of want to do is just sit here for a half hour and think about it, but we're not going to do that. I just thought it was so interesting that I mean, first of all, it was fascinating to hear about her life's work. She's been at the Kaiser Family Foundation for, I think, 26 years. I think basically since she got her doctorate, she went straight working and just worked her way up, and is very accomplished in her field. So it was very interesting to hear what she does. And also, you know, when she was giving me the background on what she was going to talk about, I just thought that was very fascinating. It was also very timely. So I wanted to move on and do a little bit of learning with you. I looked around, and our tradition doesn't have a lot to say about like polling per se. Like it talks about census taking, you know, like and counting the Israelites and all of that. But there isn't specifically about polling and that kind of like, you know, representation. So I decided to move a little bit just in the direction of democracy. So I was going to bring the Winston Churchill quote that she mentioned to me when we spoke earlier to you, but she brought it to you first. So now you're a little bit familiar with it, which, you know, as she explained, like this, you know, that research polling is imperfect, but she considers it, you know, a critical part of our democracy. And so I wanted to talk about kind of, you know, another action of any democracy is that it can lead to enmity. If there's too much strife, then the system is clogged. So I thought I would take a look with you at what our tradition has to say about this, about strife, about disagreements. Nava, I have two screens to share. So this is from Pirkei Avot, which is part of the Mishnah. In chapter 5, verse 17, it discusses the nature of disagreement and machloket. So it says, Kol machloket shehi l'shem shamayim, right? All disputes, all disagreements that are for the sake of heaven. Sofa lehitkayam, they will endure in the end. But she'ena l'shem shamayim, if it's not for the sake of heaven, whatever that means, they call it the sake of heaven, ein sofa lehitkayam, those will not endure. And they ask, what's the controversy that's for the sake of heaven? Like, what does that even mean to have a disagreement that's for the sake of heaven? So they explain that such is the controversy of Hillel and Shammai, and what's a controversy that's not for the sake of heaven, that's going to be the controversy of Korach and his congregation. So I thought I'd unpack that just a little bit so we have an idea of like, what is the definition of L'Shem Shamayim, for the sake of heaven? So in the text, it says, the positive example is Hillel and Shammai. So it's well known, apparently, that I learned, that when Hillel and Shammai, who disagreed, like vehemently disagreed, they were like, one said black, the other said white, when they would present their position on something, they would first present the opponent, they would present the other person's position first, right? And so basically saying, I have respect for this. I have respect for what this person is bringing, and now I'm going to tell you what I think, right? So that's considered l'shem shamayim. That is a kind of disagreement that is considered for the sake of heaven. That's a positive thing. The negative example that this text brings is eina l'shem shamayim. That's not for the sake of heaven. Is Korach. So Korach was a member of the Levite class, and he staged a rebellion against the leadership of Moses and Aaron. Korach and his 250 supporters basically said, like, who made you so holy? Like, why you? We're all holy. Why can't, why are you the leaders? And long story short, Korach was swallowed up by the earth. So I'm not going to unpack that part of the story here. But suffice it to say that the commentators focus less on Korach's questioning of Moses' leadership and more on his unholy intentions. So, we could say, like, it's a valid question. Like, how did you guys get to be the leaders here? And why not us? But that's not the point. The point, according to all the commentators, was that his rebellion was based on jealousy and strife and personal power and not the issues. Next page, Nava. So Rav Nachman of Bratslav, who was a Hasidic master, he also happened to be the subject of my senior thesis. And for those of you who remember when Alan Goldstein was president, he would bring a quote from Rav Nachman of Bratslav to us during his announcements every Shabbat in his couple years there. So Nachman of Bratslav wrote further about this idea of machloket. He wrote in his work was called Likutei Moharan. And in chapter 136, he says, if a person is experiencing a machloket, right, if they're just in a disagreement with something or someone, they must reflect deeply to still find merits in their fellow. They should try to understand what the machloket is about in their fellow's view in order to judge them favorably, right? So throughout Jewish tradition, right, these are just a couple examples, we're just instructed to honor our opponent wherever possible, wherever we can. And we're reminded that there are these multiple truths out there. The liturgy says that there is one truth in heaven, and there's like, truth is in heaven and truths are on earth, right? So we have these multiple truths, and we should approach these areas of disagreement and strife with just a little bit of humility, knowing that there are many truths. There's a couple famous midrashim that one of them says, it kind of ends with Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim, right? This opinion and that opinion, Elu ve'elu, are both words of the ever-living God, right? So these both count as like valid. Another midrash says, Shiv'im panim l'Torah. There are 70 faces to the Torah, like 70 ways to interpret the Torah. You know, on every page of Chumash, there are like 10 commentators around. In the Mikrot Gedolot, there's 10 commentators around, you know, explaining every line of the Torah, right? And this is this idea that there are multiple ways to approach a subject or an issue, and we should work to understand the other's perspective. And we're charged to approach disagreements l'shem shamayim. Oh, I don't need to share the screen anymore, Nava. We're charged to approach disagreements l'shem shamayim, like for the sake of heaven, with civility and respect, with an effort to understand all sides of the issue. Like it's upon us to know what the issues are and to really see all sides of the issue. At the same time, we're also charged to not to approach them not for the sake of heaven, with a focus on personalities like Korach, and rather we should be focusing on the issues themselves. So as we head into these elections, let's just do our best to honor the ideals of Jewish tradition. And let's approach all this polling data that Mollyann is telling us about with this eye toward figuring out, you know, what information is coming out as really trying to be good consumers of the information that we're getting and good consumers of this data, and try and really focus on, you know, all the different sides of the issue to be as educated consumers as possible. So that's our learning tonight. I wanted to finish my part with a Rosh Chodesh prayer, because today, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to grab my book. As I mentioned earlier, last night started Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, which ends, it was all day today and it's all day tomorrow until tomorrow night. And so the Hebrew month of Cheshvan is sometimes affectionately called Mar Cheshvan. Mar has a double meaning. Mar means bitter in Hebrew, because it is very, very sad for the month of Cheshvan that there are no holidays in it. And it's just coming off the heels of Tishrei, which was chock full of holidays. So we say Mar Cheshvan because it's, you know, Cheshvan could be a little bitter. But we also say Mar Cheshvan because Mar also means Mr. or Sir in Hebrew. So we also give the month of Cheshvan a little bit of respect, because it doesn't have the, naturally have the fun holidays and stuff in it. So, so that's why we call it Mar Cheshvan. So when we announce the new month, we read a prayer prior to actually saying Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan will be on this day and the other day. And it is actually one of my very favorite poems or prayers in our liturgy. So I wanted to read it to you. I really love the poetry, which the Sim Shalom prayer book does a very nice job of translating. It doesn't pull in all the poetry, but I'll just, the last line in particular I love. So I'll give you the exact translation of that at the end. So let's all honor Mar Cheshvan with this prayer for the new month. Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu. May it be your will, Adonai our God and God of our ancestors, shetichadesh aleinu et hachodesh hazeh, to l'tova u'livracha, to reawaken us in joy and blessing in the month ahead. B'titen lanu chayim arukim, chayim shel shalom, and grant us long life, a peaceful life with goodness and blessing. Chayim shel tova, chayim shel bracha. Oh, that was peaceful life, goodness, and blessing. Chayim shel parnasa, chayim shel chilutz atzamot, sustenance and physical vitality. Chayim sheyesh behem yirat shamayim v'yirat chet, a life of reverence and piety. Chayim she'en behem busha v'chlima, a life free from shame and reproach. Chayim shel osher v'chavod, a life of abundance and honor. Chayim shetehe banu ahavat Torah v'yirat shamayim, a reverent life guided by love of Torah. And here's my favorite line, because it's the last line. Chayim sheyimal'u mishalot libenu l'tova, a life in which our worthy aspirations will be fulfilled. And I love it so much because the exact translation, the poetic translation is just worthy aspirations, which is very nice. But I love the exact translation. It's a chaim sheyimal'u, which fills mishalot libenu l'tova. Mishalot are like the wishes of my heart, of the good wishes of my heart, right? So yimalu mishalot is like to fulfill my wishes, the wishes of my heart. And it finishes with tova, l'tova, only the good wishes of my heart. We all have lots of wishes in our heart, but it's only the good wishes of our heart. And I love that so much. And we say together, Amen. And what I love about this prayer is that every single month, we have the opportunity to either pray to God or just reflect and say, like, you know what? I got another chance. Like, I've got another chance. Like, we have a whole month ahead of us. We have a whole Hebrew month ahead of us where I can restart and renew and refresh, just like the moon is, and refocus if I've gotten a little lost. And it just makes me just so happy. So that is the prayer for the new month. And that is really all I have. I just wanted to let you know about next meeting, and then I'll hand it over to Karen for any housekeeping or announcements. Our next meeting is next week. Actually, we have one more in October, and then 2 November, 2 December. And it's the same Zoom and same time, 8 o'clock. My plan is, I'm still confirming. I've confirmed the speaker, and she's just going to let me know if it's going to be next week or November, but I'm hoping it's next week. It's going to be a member of the outreach team of Shasheret, and they're going to talk to us about what's Jewish about breast and ovarian cancer. And she's going to help us understand how to be a caring community, especially during this time when friends and family members are going to surgeries and chemo and other treatments by themselves because nobody can go with them. So I spoke with one of the members of the outreach team, and she was fantastic, and she's going to get one of her colleagues to speak with us, most likely next week. So I'll have that firmed up by tomorrow, and we'll get the publicity out. And that's all I have. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to hand it over to Karen Harris to let us know what else is going on with CBS Women.
Well, hi, everybody. Vicki, thanks so much for today's session. It was really great. It was just a neat way to bring in current events and then give it that Jewish spin. So it was lovely. In terms of CBS Women, we have a ton of events going on. We actually have tentative events all through the end of the year, except for the 2 Sundays around Thanksgiving and then the 2 Sundays at the end of December. So, and like CBS Women Insights, it's the same Zoom link for 11 a.m. So check us out, and details will slowly be forthcoming. And then the other thing going on in November is, of course, the JCC Book Fair. It's going to be entirely virtual this year, and CBS Women is sponsoring 2 speakers. One on November 4th on, hold on, I have the title, but on November 4th, it's Why Do Jews Do That? Or 30 Questions Your Rabbi Never Answered. And that's Wednesday, November 4th at 7:30. And then the second one that we're sponsoring is Joan London. And it's Why Did I Come Into This Room? A Candid Conversation About Aging. All this will be in written materials. Just wanted to pique your interest and encourage you to continue to come, continue to be involved. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's Leslie Weiner. I wanted to thank Vicki for a very interesting program this evening. And I have to use my favorite word, b'sheret, because when you ended with this beautiful prayer that we say each month for the beginning of the new month, and I love the poem, the psalm that we were reading, but I chuckle to myself because for many, many years now, I guess since I've had a family of 4 children, I keep saying, why does God smush so many holidays into a short time? Why can't we spread them out a little bit? Maybe we would appreciate each one even more. And to the point that, and some months, don't get anything and their feelings must be hurt. So I keep saying, I keep praying to God and I never get an email answer about, let's see, I'll think about that. Maybe we'll spread out those holidays. But I just thought it was basharily appropriate for you to have presented that tonight. Thank you so much.
And I'm glad you enjoyed it. Good. I'm glad everybody was here. Thank you.
Yasher Koa, beautiful.
Thank you. All right, so we have another minute. Everybody doing okay? Let's hear it.
Yep. Okie dokie. Oh, we had a family birthday celebration in our children Edward and Jamie's backyard because we have 4 October birthdays. Their 2 children, our other grandson, and my great niece, who my grandchildren think is one of our grandchildren. Her dad, my nephew. So it was very nice. We were socially distanced. Well, we brought food in and it was just delightful.
And Sandy did that again.
Delightful.
Oh, it was for Father's Day.
Nice. Oh, that's so nice.
Vicki, thank you so much. And I have a question because some of us are in Ahava next week. Is it possible to record the session that we could watch later?
Yeah, for sure. We're recording this one. I meant to record last time in September, and that was just it was my first one, and there was only so many things that I could do. I completely forgot to tell now.
I know several of us would love that.
Okay, good. Yeah, so this one is recorded, and that's going to be our that's what we're going to do moving forward. Is we're always going to record.
Thanks.
So, yeah.
Hey, I just wanted to say hi to Diane Goldman. That's Vicki Teller's mom, everybody, and Vicki's sister's on as well. Lori is there in San Francisco. So hugs from Houston to all of Vicki's special people.
Thank you. We had a birthday party lunch for my mom today. Her birthday was on the 14th. So we got everybody together, and Maya showed up from Israel on Zoom, and Ariella was there, and my sister was there from Santa Barbara. It was really, it was a treat. We played a quiz about my mom. We played bingo. We did music. Our Nava and Ramon did a little today's your birthday. It was very fun.
Oh, happy birthday, Diane.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Happy birthday.
And happy early birthday to Shira Moses tomorrow. Woo, woo, woo.
Oh.
All right, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I really enjoyed it. I'm really enjoying this, and I appreciate having the opportunity.
Thank you. There's some good advantages about